Hello and welcome back to the Herbal Entrepreneur Conference. I'm Yolanda Joy, and in this session, we are going to be talking about a topic for everyone who wants to grow herbs. This is about how to produce high quality herbs when you are starting to up the game and grow herbs at scale. For this session, I am so thrilled to introduce someone who really does know this topic back to front, has even written the book on the subject. Jeff Carpenter, who is a medicinal herb farmer and author of the book, The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer. Jeff, I'm so glad that you can join us today.
Thanks for having me, Yolanda. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it is such a pleasure to learn from you in this session. I have personally read your book and learned a lot from what you share inside that resource. And I hope we're going to get a little bit into that in today's session as well. But before we do, I think it would be great to start with a bit of an introduction as to yourself, what your book is about, what you do at the farm. So yeah, I'll let you take it away from here.
Okay. The name of my farm is Zach Woods Herb Farm, and my wife Melanie and I have owned the farm we're going into our 25th season. So a little bit of background of how I came to get into this vocation is when I met Melanie in high school. Her stepmother is Rosemary Gladstar, whom I think most of your audience probably knows who she is. So Rosemary introduced me to the world of herbalism, which is a magical opportunity for me to sort of dovetail my passion for farming that I grew up as a kid in Vermont around some of my family who were dairy farming, and was really attracted to that working landscape kind of concept and the magic of the healing nature of plants. And so Melanie and I went on to partner in Sage Mountain herb products for a while. And when we were making products, we were having a hard time finding high quality herbs, especially locally. So we thought, wow, what a great opportunity for someone to grow these plants locally and sell them. And at the time, it was kind of only like a dream. We really liked working with plants, but our business was doing well. And then we had kind of a crux in our business where Whole Foods approached us, and they wanted to start buying pallets of jars of the Rosemary's Famous face cream that we were producing, and some of the other things that we were producing on a very small scale in our kitchen in our apartment in Vermont. And at that point, we felt like we either needed to get really big and develop, buy a manufacturing facility and develop our product line to larger scale, or maybe we should do this other thing that we were thinking about, which is to grow medicinal herbs and provide high quality herbs for other people who are in our position, who are having trouble finding high quality stuff, especially locally. So we sold the herbal product business and we went out on a limb and we bought our farm. Our farm is here in central Vermont in the US. And when we started out farming, we grew about 70 or 80, well, between 60 and 80 different species of herbs. It was mostly experimental at the time. And we have, through the course of 25 years, really scaled it down. And now we're only producing between maybe 15 and 20 species of herbs on a commercial scale. We still have hundreds of other species of plants growing on our land, but from a production standpoint, we've really scaled that down. We've learned a lot in 25 years, and I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of that with your audience. I also had the really awesome opportunity to run the International Herb Symposium with Rosemary and my wife, Melanie. So that's another aspect of my history in the world of herbs.
Wow, it does sound like you've got a great experience in a lot of different aspects of herbalism, because there is the product business where you started, then moving into the farming, you're like teaching through writing your book, and also the International Herb Symposium as well. So you've just like got a great background, and I imagine connections with a lot of the herbalists probably listening today as well. You've probably met them at other various conferences around the place too.
For sure, yes. Some of our closest friends and family members are in this awesome world of herbalism, and it's been a magical 30 years of being in this industry. And I encourage more people to consider doing this if they haven't already.
Yeah, it is such a wonderful industry, I think, more than anything for the people. Yeah, there's just such a great bunch of herbalists who look out for each other and really do just support each other in this journey as we go forward, which is really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So diving into today's session, our topic really is about keeping that high quality of herbs when we are producing at scale. So when it does come to that, what do you think are the key activities that we need to consider in order to do this well?
That's a great question. So, from my standpoint, quality is the most important consideration when producing medicinal herbs, not only for your own use, but for sale, for commercial purposes. And that starts at selecting the right species of plants to grow. So, here in our climate in Vermont, we have a pretty short growing season, so we're pretty limited in what we can grow. We started out in the early years, as I mentioned, like really experimentally, and trying to grow too many things that were a little bit, I guess, exotic, if you will, and not really suitable for our climate and not as adaptable. So we've really, part of our refinement has been honing that down to growing plants that are more appropriate for our climate and for our soil types and stuff. So that's kind of like, I would say, the foundation of quality is selecting the right plants to grow. That doesn't mean that you can't grow plants that are not suitable for your region. In fact, we still do that. But what we've learned is there are some things that I'll just take one pretty kind of extreme example is Eurasian licorice. So we tried to grow licorice here. It's an incredible plant. I have a close affinity with licorice, but it doesn't do well here at all. And we could not have success with it no matter how hard we try. That doesn't mean they can't grow licorice in other places. But so that's kind of the foundation of quality. The next thing is growing the plants in the best conditions possible. So trying to match the plants that you're growing with kind of their preferred habitat if you can, and their preferred growing conditions. So for example, growing something like Tulsi, which is native to the Indian subcontinent, is going to want to grow in conditions that are a little more, dry and hot and full sun, versus something like some of our prized woodland medicinals. I'll just mention like ginseng, for example, or golden seal, which are native plants here in Vermont. They want to grow in their preferred habitat, which is dappled shade or dappled sunlight in the understory of the mature forest. So selecting the right plants in the right site and also the right soil types, and providing the right balance of nutrients and especially minerals. A lot of the attributes that we as users of herbal medicine really seek in these plants is their wealth of minerals. And so having mineral rich soil and the proper nutrients in the soil and the proper amount of irrigation, or sometimes even withholding irrigation to some of the plants that we're growing, really respond well to stress, especially those that are more aromatic in nature. Some of the ones that have high percentages of volatile oils. I'll just mention like lavender, for example. Like lavender doesn't grow super well here in Vermont. So what we can do to try to elevate the essential oil content is to, especially like close to harvest time, is to try to withhold irrigation, and hopefully it's not raining so that the plants experience a little bit of stress and develop higher levels of volatile oils. So that's another aspect of quality, is really just getting to know the plants and what each individual plant really likes, and growing it to its full potential, and then harvesting it at the peak of potency, which is really important. And that varies from plant to plant. A lot of the flowering herbaceous plants that we grow, for example, are best when harvested when they're either in the early or mid stages of flowering before they start going to seed. And that's kind of like a lot of these individual plants have different, windows of peak potency. So becoming knowledgeable about what those kind of like the timeline looks like for that is important. And then the final kind of, and one of the most important things to consider is dehydrating the herbs. Most of the herbs that we use as herbalists and that are sold in the US and outside of the US are dehydrated. And that's one of the really awesome advantages that we have as herb farmers, is that we don't have to deal with the challenges of perishability that farmers that are growing crops like vegetables or apples or whatever have, that like short window of perishability. So by dehydrating the plants, pulling all the water out of the plants, we're able to store them for longer periods of time. The challenge with dehydration is that plants have a lot of water in them. Like they're like 75% water by weight. And so what we have to do is to try to remove all of that water as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can, while also protecting some of the really sensitive compounds that are prone to being degraded if either the plants are left out too long, exposed to the elements too long, or if the temperatures are too high. So again, like going back to the plants with high levels of aromatics, like I'll just mention lavender again. Like lavender is a plant that is very sensitive to the temperatures when drying. And there are other plants that are not so sensitive, that don't have those volatile oils, so we can dry those at higher temperatures. Like something like stinging nettle, for example, we're drying at higher temperatures. Some of the root crops we're drying at higher temperatures. So really becoming educated as to the importance of temperature control, and again, drying the plants as fast as we can so that they're not exposed to the elements and their qualities don't degrade. And then after that, the post-harvest processing is important. So again, we're speaking of producing the highest quality herbs we can. In my opinion, that is those highest quality herbs are produced through hand processing, maybe a little bit of automation. But when we get into the bigger scale, like the really large scale herbs, the farms that are growing like 200 acres or more, like oftentimes quantity becomes the primary consideration over quality. And that's when things become a lot more automated, and the final processing becomes more automated. And that's when we see degradation in the quality. We can see, not always, but we can see degradation in the quality of plants just based on the automated nature of which they're processed. So here on our farm, and a lot of the small to mid-scale farms that are having success here in the US and elsewhere are doing a little bit more of hand processing. We call it garbling. That's the term that we use. It's mainly with the leaf crops, the herbaceous plants that we're growing, is separating the leaves from the stems. Other plants don't need as much processing. Some of the blossom crops that we're harvesting, like chamomile, calendula, for example, we can just harvest them and dry them and then package them after they're dried. There's not much processing there. Excuse me. Root crops, on the other hand, there's a little more processing. So they need to be washed before they're dehydrated, and oftentimes need to be milled. And that's where, even on a small scale, I recommend a little bit more automation, because chopping roots by hand becomes laborious and tedious. So depending on the scale that you're considering on operating, these are some of the considerations for producing the highest quality herbs, for sure. And then storage is really important too. Storing them in cool, dark, as airtight containers as you can. And long-term storage is okay. Some of the crops that I mentioned, like that have less aromatic properties, like the root crops and things like stinging nettle, I'll bring that example up again, are a lot more like okay with being stored long term. Some of the more volatile plants, the plants with highly aromatic properties, even in really ideal storage conditions, don't have as long of a shelf life, and that varies from plant to plant. And that's another thing to just to try to become educated about as you develop your farming techniques in your markets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a common theme that you have mentioned a couple of times when it's come to all of those different points throughout that production process is like education, and really knowing the herbs and the specific ways that each of them should be grown, like the conditions they need, whether you should be growing them there in the first place, like you mentioned at the beginning, but then also like the temperature that they should be dried at, like how they should be stored, all of these things. It's like education on each specific plant. For that, where do you recommend people get this knowledge? Is it like hands-on by trying? Is it like apprenticeships with someone else? Is it through books? Like, how would you recommend someone to get this knowledge of how to work with each herb throughout the production process?
Yes, it's all those things that you mentioned. I think the best education comes from working directly with the plants. Like, we learn so much just from working with these plants from seed to harvest and then use, like drinking the tea after we've but there are other resources. So when Melanie and I started our farm in 1999, there were not a lot of resources, and we had to rely on a lot of just trial and error. And we had some mentors. Our kind of primary mentors were Matthias and Andrea Risen from Healing Spirits Herb Farm in New York, and they've been invaluable partners and colleagues and friends of ours for a long time, and we share ideas back and forth. So that like mentorship kind of cooperative arrangements are really awesome and recommended. There are a lot of resources out there for growing herbs. More of the resources that are available are geared toward the smaller scale kind of hobbyist approach. And then there's some that are like geared towards the really large scale, like some of the high scale production that's going on in like places like Europe and the Far East and stuff. So what we try to do is we wrote a book called The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer that is what we're trying to do is like to give people a really like common sense how to guide for getting into this industry and having success at any scale, although it's more geared toward the small to mid scale. And so books are good resources too. And I think the most valuable lessons learned are just through experimentation and trial and error and growing these plants and learning from the plants and learning from the earth and watching how the plants respond to different things, different levels of nutrients and other inputs like irrigation. And fortunately, these plants are most of these plants, in fact, almost all the plants that we're using as medicinal plants are wild plants. So they're not like most of the vegetables and other commodity crops and stuff that are grown here in the US and elsewhere are plants that have been highly bred or hybridized or even genetically modified, unfortunately. And the cool thing about the herbs that we're growing is they're basically wild plants that we're cultivating. And so they're naturally resistant to pests and diseases. And they're just a joy to grow. And they're also, a lot of them are insectaries. So they attract beneficial insects. So they really serve like so many purposes. Some of the cover crops that we grow that most farmers grow just to enrich the soil. Like an example I'll give is we grow a combination of oats and red clover to enrich our soils. The beauty of those is that we can also market the red clover blossoms and we can market the milky oat heads. So we have that kind of value added approach to our cover crops. So there's so much to learn and there's a lot of resources. And again, I think most of the success you're going to have is learning by doing.
Yeah, I think that's a nice perspective as well of learning from the plants and just giving yourself time to learn as you go and from all the different resources, because there are lots of different ways of learning. And sometimes you do need to learn as you get out there and try as well. It's all part of the journey. I think the other like big aspect of farming really does come into the business side of things. So like, there is the farming and the business, and being able to fit those two things together is really important if you actually want to be an herb farmer long term. If you want to make a living by herb farming, you need to consider the business side of things as well. So what are the most important things to keep in mind from a business perspective when it comes to herb farming?
Well, I'll start out by saying that I think a lot of people get into herb farming because they're more active physically and they really enjoy being outside in nature and working with their hands and in the earth. And so these are generally people that are not really like attracted to the kind of like 9 to 5 work a day, like, office kind of a job. And so you really have to like, as an herb farmer, you really have to kind of like get inside and sit at the desk and at the computer and kind of get the spreadsheets out in order to be successful. And I think that starts with developing a business plan for those that are considering going into this as a business. And I say that, however, Melanie and I, it took us, I think it was 12 years out of our 25 before we really developed a business plan. And those first 12 years we did okay without it, but we should have done it from day one. And it was really, it really added so much information to us and more success to develop a business plan. And the business plan doesn't need to be super elaborate. What it does is, I think the kind of foundational piece of it is like establishing kind of a vision and a mission. Like, what do you want to do and where do you see yourself and what are your like really important like I guess, philosophical goals, and also just financial goals and spiritual goals and whatever, and kind of outlining those, and then um, taking a look at where you want to see yourself in the herbal marketplace. Do you want to be small scale, focused on really high quality, or do you want to be really big scale, focused on more on like mass production and high automation, and more of like, you know, selling to the really large like herbal product resellers? Or do you want to just sell herbs, or do you want to be more like selling value added products? There's a term called vertical integration, which describes like it's more like seed to bottle. So doing everything like from growing the plants to making the herbal products to selling the herbal products. And a lot of people have success with that. There's a couple that come to mind that have had incredible success with that, not without challenges, but our friends Kathy Langelier of Herbal Revolution and Deb Soul of Avena Herbs. Coincidentally, they're both in Maine. They're like two of, in my opinion, that I know of the people who've had the most success doing that kind of seed to bottle approach. Or do you want to just you know, again, scale? Like, do you want to just grow a little bit for your friends in your community and maybe like a local herb store? Or do you want to consider growing more so that you can tap into more wholesale markets, or a combination of retail and wholesale, which is what we do here. Our retail end is more like on our online presence through our website, but we also produce wholesale herbs for people who are making herbal products. And there are a lot of other markets to consider. There are herbal practitioners, there are you know, tea makers, there are companies and people who are making spirits with herbs, things like absinthe and other herbal aromatic spirits. There are you know, people who are making herbal products that are used for external purposes and for internal purposes. And some of the challenges with herbal products that are used for internal purposes, like herbal medicine, are that the FDA is going to probably get involved. So there's challenges there with DSHEA, with the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and the GMPs. But these are some of the considerations. So trying to figure out where you want to be in the herbal marketplace, and then again, where do you see yourself as far as scale? And what I recommend is people start out small and then grow within your means as you develop your markets and your knowledge base, and you kind of figure out like, what do you want to do? And there's so many value added products that can add value to what you're doing. Like, what we sell is primarily, again, bulk medicinal herbs, but we've also had good success with selling live potted medicinal plants. So that's another value added option that people should consider, because these medicinal plants are not as common, like for people who are going to their garden centers and nursery yards to try to find plants. So there's a really good niche opportunity there. So finding your niche and having success in it. And I think product differentiation is another good aspect to consider. There are a lot of people who are growing and selling bulk herbs, and there are a lot of people who are growing and selling medicinal herbal products. But if you can find a way to kind of be unique and be different and find your own niche, that's going to bring success. Fortunately, right now, and for a long time into I think, in the past and in the future, is that the herbal products industry is growing in leaps and bounds. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the demand for herbs and herbal products is like growing really rapidly. And so there's really incredible opportunities for people to get into this work. And here in the US, most of the raw materials, the herbs that are used in the manufacture of herbal products, are imported. And we have the ability to really produce most of the herbs here domestically. And we need more people growing, and the demand is there. And the demand is, again, mostly for really high quality herbs. And what I would really recommend people do is, when you're starting out your business plan and formulating your business and getting into your business, is pricing is one of the the most challenging considerations that a lot of people I work with on a consulting or mentoring basis really ask. And that's one of the challenges that they face is like, how do I price my herbs? And the most important consideration there is cost of production. So what does it cost you to produce the herbs? And that's how the pricing should be set. And in order to analyze that cost of production, it requires a lot of like record keeping. And again, that's not something a lot of people are really like drawn to. It's not as fun. It's not really the sexy side of herb farming is walking around with a notebook and tracking all your time doing things. But it's really important, especially in the early stages of developing your business, so that once you figure out what it costs you to produce, say, a pound of chamomile blossoms, then you can price accordingly. The primary consideration should not be especially for small to mid-scale growers, the primary consideration shouldn't be like, what is everyone else charging? It's more important like that you pay yourself a fair wage so that you can keep doing what you love to do and you can keep being successful in your business. And that's going to vary from farm to farm, depending on your climate, your growing conditions, and how efficiently you grow and harvest the plants and the quality of the plants. And so people in general, what we find is that most of the people who are buying herbs are really willing to pay for high quality. And so just keep that in mind. I think that's the most important thing, is being able to pay yourself well, and people will honor that. Of course, we want to have herbal medicine be affordable, and we want it to be accessible to people of all means. So keeping that in mind too, not being greedy, but definitely making sure that you can pay yourself to keep doing what you love to do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I love that you brought up the cost of production of the herb, because that is a really important metric for people to have a bit of an idea. And I think a lot of herbalists, especially the ones who are just getting started, would have no idea how much it really does cost them to produce a certain amount of herb. And especially when it comes to their labor time and how long they're spending garbling the herbs or like just doing the activities. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into that specifically now. So when you are working out the cost of production of the herb, what are the different factors that you consider, or like what do you bring into that calculation to figure out how much it costs to produce the herb?
That's a good question. So there are kind of two things. There's like the general category of overhead, which is like, what is your these are the more like fixed kind of costs. So if you own or are renting land, like what does that involve? What is your monthly mortgage payment or your rent payment? And then what are your like utilities, and what are your some of those fixed costs? Like what is the overhead? Like that's usually part of the formula that's a little more constant and able to be kind of like calculated like from a regular basis. And then the more variable costs are like the labor costs and the inputs, as far as like how long does it take you to perform a certain task. And that's really going to be highly variable from species to species and even different types of plants. So hand harvesting chamomile blossoms is going to take a lot more time than digging echinacea root with a mechanical digger. And so really tracking all of the inputs, the fertilizers, and the costs of preparing the ground, and cover cropping, and your seeds, and again labor, like really tracking labor is the most important thing. So the beauty of this is that the longer you do it, the easier it becomes. And a lot of these formulas, or a lot of these components of the formulas, become a little bit more known and a little bit more like solid, so that you don't have to continually track them from year to year. So like when it took us like a few years to figure out how long it takes us to harvest like what equates to 10 pounds of dried calendula blossoms, and that kind of component of the formula doesn't really change from year to year, because we've gotten really efficient at harvesting and we know how to do that. So that's kind of a way of measuring cost of production that we don't have to continue to do, because we've kind of established that that kind of timeline and what it costs. But there are so many other inputs that need to be tracked. It's basically like you have to kind of consider that your farm has a gate, And every time something comes through that gate, you have to kind of like track it and, record it as your cost. And then again, the labor, your own labor, especially, like a lot of people, a lot of the kind of farmers that I work with that are in the early stages of their business are pretty good at like tracking the cost of production as far as their labor from the people they hire, but they forget to pay to track their own labor. And it's hard because you realize as a farmer, in order to have success, like especially if you get into the more mid to larger scale, like you really have to work so hard. Like we work, during the growing season, like 50 to 60, sometimes even 70 hours a week. And it's hard to really quantify and to pay yourself and to figure out how to pay yourself like a really good hourly wage. And if you did that, you'd probably go crazy and it would be really hard to swallow. But you just have to try to like have a better understanding of what that looks like. And hopefully as you develop your farm and your efficiencies increase and your markets increase, you'll start to realize that you are actually paying yourself a decent wage. Never probably going to be as high of a wage as what you would learn in the in the world outside of farming, but it's more of a lifestyle choice than anything. And we can have success. Melanie and I have been doing this for 25 years now. In the early days, we had off-farm jobs, and we've gotten away from that. Like we can subsist solely on our farm, and that doesn't mean we live exorbitant lifestyles, but we have like our quality of life is so high. That's another way that we place value on the work that we do, is like the quality of life. So these are important factors to consider. And again, just pricing your herbs according to what you feel their value is based on their cost of production and their quality.
Yeah, I think that quality of life is a really important point to bring up as well, because doing this, it allows you to live on a farm and do the activities that you enjoy doing. And also, like, there is a certain kind of pleasure out of just seeing things grow and being able to provide those quality herbs to other people as well, and just like get that out there. If it's work that wouldn't be done otherwise, and it is it's a beautiful kind of work to be able to actually get the herbs, grow them, and bring them out to people. So it's like there is a certain satisfaction in the work itself as well.
There sure is. That is I think one of the most value aspects of doing this work is the feedback that we receive from customers and the feedback that we receive from growing these incredibly magical plants and then using them, and the way that they make us feel, not only when we're working with them out in the field and watching them, grow and mature and express themselves in their full beauty. But then when we have that intimate connection with the plants, and then when we take them into our body, and that relationship is like so much deeper. Not only are we like tasting the plants and feeling the value of harvesting the fruits of our labor, but we're also benefiting from the wellness that these plants bring, whether it's like healing or boosting your immune system or just feeling good or tasting good. Like there's so much there that is so rewarding outside of the financial realm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's important to think about, because of its a kind of hidden benefit that people don't always notice up front. Based on the feedback that you are getting from people who have your herbs, they notice that there is the high quality, and like they appreciate the work that you are doing as well. I'm wondering if you have any like tips of the trade that you can share with us, specifically about how to maintain that high quality of the herbs that are produced on your farm.
Yeah, again, I think the most important thing is harvesting the herbs at their peak of potency. And I think drying is where you can really make or break quality, the dehydration, as I mentioned. So there can be a pretty steep learning curve there, and there's no like A plus B equals C formula for what works for everyone. So a lot of this is going to come through experimentation. And on the smaller scale, dehydration can look like a very small scale, like hanging bundles of herbs from the rafters of your barn or your kitchen or whatever, and just watching them and making sure that they're they're drying, and removing them from that environment when they're dry before they're like exposed to the elements too long. And then you can, get a little bit bigger scale and look at like drying herbs on screens, which are like racks with screens on them. And that can be either really small scale, like using some window screens in your, that you've taken off your windows, maintaining hygiene, of course, so making sure that the drying environment is clean. And then there can be like, you can scale that up with having a lot of screens in a room. Having heat is really important, especially here in climates that are a little bit more humid, so that during the day when the sun is out, we can take advantage of some of the solar gain. But at night, or if it's raining, when the herbs are exposed to higher humidity, they can reabsorb moisture and it can slow the drying down. So having supplemental heat really helps to continue or even speed up the drying process. And airflow is important, and having a dark condition when you're drying the herbs, because the herbs are sensitive to ultraviolet light. So then on a bigger scale, when we get into like, maybe 5 acres or more of production, a lot of people should consider what we call batch drying, which is drying. It's a more efficient form of drying where we're drying large batches of herbs. So I'll give you an example. Like for us, we harvest, let's say lemon balm. So we're harvesting it, and we're using an automated harvester here on our farm. We're using a sickle bar cutter, which is it's like a blade that goes off the tractor, and it just cuts the plants down. We still pick them up by hand, and we load them onto a big carrier, and then we bring them to the dryer. And so the batch dryer is basically like it's like a big box where there's forced hot air blown into the box, and that can be done with, unfortunately, with like fossil fuels. Or if you want to try to be more sustainable, you can use like other forms of heating, like wood furnaces, for example, or just relying on solar in good climates. And the batch dryer works by just loading a lot of herbs into this and blowing warm air or hot air, depending on the crop that you're growing, through the bottom of it. We have a false floor in the bottom of ours, so it's metal grating where the herbs are placed on top of, and the heat is blown through the bottom, and the heat sort of rises up through the mass of plants, forcing the water. As I mentioned, 75% water in most of these plants, so there's a lot of water vapor that's going to come out of these plants, and then exhausting that water vapor out of the drying environment. So that's a little bit bigger scale. And then on the really large scale, there are some like commercial models of large bin dryers and other higher, scale batch dryers that can be used. So drying, I think, is the most important consideration, and that's going to be learned through trial and error, and also like using resources. Like our book, we discuss a lot of the intricacies of drying with these various crops, like really getting into the specifics of different temperatures for the different crops. And again, most importantly, just getting them out of the drying environment and into packaging as soon as we can after, so that they're exposed to the elements for less time. And then that storage piece is almost as important, having them dark and airtight and cool.
Yeah, it's like trying to maintain the properties of the plants. Once you've harvested it, it's like, how can you keep it there? So that really is the drying and the storage is key concepts, especially if you're going to be selling these herbs and they need to maintain their properties.
Another aspect of quality that is always kind of in the forefront of our production is what we learned from Rosemary when we were young as herbalists, is that she taught us that the finished product, like the dried herbs, should look, smell, taste, have the similar vibration that these plants had when they were live and growing in the field before we harvested them. That's kind of our ultimate goal. And I think it's important for consumers of herbs, bulk herbs, and even herbal products to keep that in mind. So oftentimes cost becomes kind of the primary consideration, and that's understandable. Like, we need to have affordable medicine, but the primary consideration should be quality. So when you go into a store and you look in the herb jar, look and see, does that herb look like the plant looked like when it was growing in the field? Is it vibrant? Is it like, if it's chamomile blossoms, the petals really bright white, and are the centers of the flowers really bright yellow, and are the green parts really bright green, or does it look kind of like washed out and brown and tired looking? And open the jar and smell it. Is it highly aromatic, or does it just kind of faintly smell of chamomile? And what you'll find in the what we call kind of the mass market, the larger scale production, is a lot of the highly automated processing produces a product that is like has more stem in it oftentimes, especially with the leaf crops, and less of the really potent forms of the plant. So the stems really don't have much, if any, medicine in them at all. They're mostly like lignin, which is, you know, the tissue that supports the plants while they're growing. So what we're doing on our farm, and what others who are producing high quality medicines are doing is focusing on quality by, again, hand garbling and separating the stems and making sure that the plants do look as close to their growing forms as they did. So again, quality is more important than cost. Something might cost 20% lower, but if it's 20% less in potency, then it's a wash. And if you're supporting a really large operation that's, you know, importing herbs from India, or you're supporting your local organic farmer, there's good choices to be made there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think quality is at the forefront because of the herbs that you're using in your products. That's what's going to like affect everything else. If you're like infusing oils or making teas or doing tinctures, whatever it is, like those raw materials that you start with, they channel down into the final product and the effect that the herb has on the body as well. And so we need to be thinking about that in the way that we like use the herbs in producing, like for the herbal product makers listening today, but also for the growers, because we need to be upping our game in that regard as well. The higher quality that we can produce, the better the effects the herbs are going to have overall as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to cover in today's session is a little bit about the herbal marketplace as a whole, just like the trends and like what sort of things that we can think about in the way that we fit into this marketplace.
Yeah. So as a whole, the herbal marketplace is pretty volatile. We've learned a lot through the years about like popularity. So when someone talks about a particular herb and that herb gets a lot of press, like I'll just give an example. Like in the early days when we were farming, echinacea, as most of us know, probably all of us know, is a really incredible, you know, immune enhancing herb, a wonderful plant to grow. It's really suitable for growing here in our climate in the US and a lot of places, highly adaptable, really high demand. But so when we first started growing echinacea, the demand for echinacea was really high, and there was a lot of like good, like anecdotal evidence that these plants work, and of course they do. We all know that as herbalists. But then there was some press that came out, kind of some national press that was attempting to debunk some of the studies, and even was demonstrating some studies that said that echinacea is like no more efficacious than placebo at immune enhancement, and that really on the kind of the bigger market caused the price of echinacea to go down. And what we saw were some people that we knew that were growing larger scale crops of echinacea. Their enterprises went from being profitable and having this crop in the ground after growing it for 2 to 3 years and seeing that they were going to be able to, you know, to achieve a good return on their investment and all their inputs, to having that crop be so diminished in the marketability that they had to plow it into the ground. And that's kind of an extreme example, but what I'm trying to get at is that what's popular in the herbal world and what people are talking about has a lot to do with like what is selling. So when we first started growing Tulsi, which was back in the early 2000s, like not a lot of people knew about Tulsi. And we had learned about it and started growing it and drinking the tea and realized, wow, what an incredible herb. But we had trouble selling Tulsi in those early days because the education wasn't there, and as many people didn't know about it. But within a few years, Tulsi really took off. It really expanded in popularity, and we started having the challenge that we couldn't produce enough Tulsi to keep up with demand, and that's still one of the challenges that we have today. So Tulsi, that started out for us as a relatively obscure herb, has now been like one of our top sellers. And again, the volatility of the herbal marketplace has more to do with the bigger scale, like on the wholesale end, like pricing and stuff. So the way we can avoid that volatility as small to mid-scale growers is to find our niche in the marketplace and find people who are willing to buy the herbs that we're going to produce. And the demand is there. Like for us on our farm, the demand far exceeds what we can supply. And that has been one of the challenges that we've had through the years, is that we turn away so much business, and we could expand. Like we would have the I guess the position in the marketplace to expand, but we don't want to. We want to like maintain this lifestyle and focus again on quality over quantity. And we don't feel like we need to expand, but the demand is there. And this is where, again, I encourage more people to consider growing and selling medicinal herbs, because it's incredibly valuable work and we need more growers. The herbal product makers need more high quality herbs, and the earth needs more plants grown on it. It's all like a winning formula.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is space, like there's a demand for it at the moment. Like herbalism really is a growing field, and there is more and more interest in it. And yeah, the growers are at that ground level of this. Like we need the herbs to be able to work with them, and all of the other pieces work together here. Like you can see your example of the Tulsi as well. Like the education and the growers work hand in hand, because when there are education or like, I don't know, even articles, blogs, or like talking about it on social media, when it starts to become more well known, there's a bigger demand for that as well. And yeah, in general, herbalism is growing, and so we need more growers. Yeah,
Exactly. Another challenge that some of us face in the kind of mid to a little bit bigger scale of herbal product manufacture or growing and manufacture is that we are selling a lot of our, on the wholesale end, we're selling a lot of herbs to small to mid-scale herbal product manufacturers. And as a lot of us know, like they've had a lot of challenges with the FDA, with pressure from the FDA after the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act formed, and some of the CGMPs were really tightened up. The good manufacturing processes, procedures were tightened up. So we went from in the early days being able to sell to all these herbal product manufacturers just directly and having them do most of the manufacture of their own herbal products. And that was awesome for everyone. That has changed somewhat, especially in the last 10 to 15 years with the DSHEA. And the challenge now is that a lot of these herbal product makers who had such a challenging time with adapting to FDA pressure and regulations, we're kind of forced in some examples to work with contract manufacturers. So these are bigger companies who are like doing kind of private label manufacturing for these small to mid-scale herbal product manufacturers. And in so doing, the brands, the smaller to mid-scale brands, were not as able to buy directly from the farms because the contract manufacturers wanted to do their own sourcing. And this is still the case for the most part, that the contract manufacturers are sourcing the raw materials. And in general, quality is not they're at the top of their priority list. I think not always, but in most examples, cost is the primary consideration for them. So they're buying large volumes of raw material to do this private labeling. What I would encourage growers and manufacturers of herbal products to do is to really ask these contract manufacturers to consider working with small farmers. And I think in a lot of cases, they're willing to do that. It's a little bit more difficult for them to do that because of the challenges with lot tracking and chain of custody type stuff. But it's doable, and we've seen success with that. Some of the brands that we work with and have worked with, I'll just give like one example. Urban Moonshine, who had Jovial, had a lot of challenges dealing with the FDA for a long time, and was able to kind of pivot and come back to her roots. And her Urban Moonshine is back here in Vermont right now, and they're buying directly from the farms, and they're working with a contract manufacturer who is willing to to get on board with them sourcing directly from the farm. So I think we just need to work with the brands to try to encourage them to encourage their contract manufacturers to consider quality over cost and over quantity, and to work with local domestic growers of these high quality plants.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, I think today's session has been really useful across the board when it comes to growing the quality, the business aspect, the markets. We've really covered a lot in today's session. And so, yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything. But I would like it if you could summarize a little bit what you have shared with your top 3 most important points for people to remember coming out of today's session.
Top 3 most important points. I think number 1 for people considering getting into growing medicinal herbs on a commercial scale is to start out small and grow within your means, and don't get too heavily indebted right off, because then it's going to be challenging to get out of that hole while you're sort of establishing your markets and developing your skills and learning how to produce a high quality product. So that would be my number 1, start out small and build slowly, but also have the capacity and the scale to really scale up as need be. And it's challenging for a lot of younger or people who are searching for land right now. The cost of land, pretty much across the board, I think is really expensive and inaccessible for a lot of people. So there are alternatives to that. Leasing land, I think, is one of the prime alternatives to that. There are a lot of people who own land that is not being used. Oftentimes it's prime agricultural land that's not being used, and they would love to see these beautiful plants being grown on it, and work with people who are doing good work with the earth and with these plants. So scale is one of the primary considerations. And the secondary consideration is to, again, pay yourself. Make sure that you can continue to do the work that you love to do, farming, by paying yourself well and paying your employees well and treating your employees well. Right now, labor challenges, I think, are a common thing across the board with most industries. And this is recently, just in the last few years, we have just started to see labor challenges ourselves. So in the early years of farming, our biggest challenge was we'd have so many people wanting to work for us that we had a hard time really saying no to a lot of people and sussing out who we wanted to work with. And that has really kind of reversed in the last few years. The labor pool has really changed, and we have some really awesome employees who have returned year after year, and we value them. And so we work hard to keep them engaged with us by providing a really awesome workplace here and paying them really well. And so that's important. Pay yourself well, pay your employees well, make sure that you are making money doing what you're doing so that you can continue to do it. And again, there are other forms of measuring wealth outside of dollars and cents, like quality of life. So we have to keep those in mind too. And I guess the third most important consideration, I would say, is learn how to dehydrate these herbs and learn how to do it well. That said, dehydration is not the only way to sell medicinal herbs. We can have good success selling fresh herbs, fresh frozen herbs. For us, we sell elderberries in a fresh frozen form. There are other aspects of, as I mentioned, selling live plants, selling value-added plants, but developing a high-quality product and knowing how, if you're going to dehydrate herbs, how to do that well, how to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible, while trying to get rid of only the water in the plants and keeping all the goodness in the plants, all the medicinal attributes and the minerals and everything, and then storing them really well. And then showing people the fruits of your labor. Go out and, for establishing new markets, there's nothing more valuable than bringing a bag or a jar of your herbs to your local co-op or your local store and showing them what you do. A lot of people ask me what comes first, the market or the plant. It's hard to go out for beginning farmers and go into an herb store or work with an herb company and say, I'd like to sell you herbs they're going to say, yeah, I would love to buy herbs from you. Can I see what you produce? They're going to want to know that you can produce what you're saying. So there's this like kind of chicken or the egg challenge. So I would recommend that you start out by just experimentally on a small scale, growing some herbs and demonstrating that you can produce a high quality product, and then bringing that out and showing that and demonstrating to your buyers that you can do that. And the product will speak for itself. Having the, the buyers be able to see the product and smell the herbs and see that vibrancy of it is the best marketing tool that we've ever used. And I think that is out there, letting the plants speak for themselves. You don't have to be an expert in marketing. That's like, again, a lot of people who get into this industry are not really like people that like to be out there like networking and marketing and doing all that marketing research and stuff. So if we produce a high enough quality product, the product will speak for itself and sell itself, and develop good relationships with your community of, people and herbal product manufacturers. And those long-term relationships can be invaluable.
Yeah, I think that's great. So like just starting at that small level and like valuing what it is you have to offer and letting the plants speak for themselves. Like, I think that's a great way of looking at it, that if you can produce the high quality herbs, the results are going to be evident. Your customers will see, they will notice the difference between those beautiful mint leaves that have the smell, and you can tell that it's like still has that essence of mint in it, rather than a bag of mixed up things all together. Like, you can really see the difference, and letting that plant being able to be at the center of what you do, I think it is the core of what being an herbal grower really is.
Exactly. One more really important. So there's 4. The other thing is like farm as efficiently as possible. So if that means like going from small scale, like cutting herbs with a knife, to like scaling up and becoming a little bit more automated without losing quality, that's going to be the key to your success. Is like efficiency is one of the most important considerations with farming.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, especially as you grow and make it into your like true way of living. You do need to be efficient. Do it well, and efficient is the best way to go about it.
Exactly.
So I would just like to thank you so much for being here, sharing your expertise with us today, and everything that you have shared. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone else listening has as well. If people want to find out more about you, Zach Wood's Herb Farm, and your book, The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer, where are the best places for them to find out more?
Probably to go to our website, which is www.zackwoodsherbs.com. And Zach is spelled Z-A-C-K, Zach Woods Herbs. A lot of people ask where the farm name came from. It's a local landmark, Zach Woods Pond. And our book, again, The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer, can be purchased on our website. The book can also be purchased from pretty much any outlet where you would typically find books. I like to recommend that people support your local independent brick and mortar bookstores when possible, because they need all the help they can get. And our herbs are in a lot of herbal products and a lot of stores, and I won't get into the list of that, but our website is where I would steer towards people. Thanks for having me on the program, Yolanda. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about herbs and herb farming, and it's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, well, you can definitely tell that this is something that you enjoy teaching and like speaking about from today's session. And I did also want to mention inside the book, the first section is about like the general principles about herb farming and like really the foundational topics. And then it has like sections on like quite a few different herbs as well that gets into the specifics. And that's kind of what you were talking about at the beginning as well, around like what we need to be aware of for each of the different plants and things like that. So if people are serious about actually growing and getting to know the specific herbs and the like nuances between how to grow and process the different herbs, it is a really good resource as well. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that plug.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared with us today. It's been such a pleasure, and I wish you all the best with the Zach Woods Herb Farm.
Thank you, Yolanda. It's been a lot of fun.